Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our panel discussion, which aims to explore the transformative changes in the electronic EU communication sector. Where, contrary to cybersecurity, we do expect a breakthrough legislation from the Commission, from the European Commission. The announcement of the Digital Networks Act set the header on fire in the ICT sector with diverging views of the stakeholders from physical, network and application layer of the internet, since it proposed the expansion of the European Electronic Communication Code. The rationale behind this and many others proposals can be stressed in a few main points. Relatively diminishing EU abilities to innovate in the ICT sector, significant network infrastructure investment gap needed to fulfill digital decade aims, growing concerns related to geopolitical tensions about the network resilience, and foremost, lack of a single market in the electronic communication per se, but also in many particular areas like radio spectrum management or consumer law. In the upcoming hour, 4 distinguished speakers will do their best to clarify this picture and emphasize critical matters and help us to understand the position of and challenges for the EU electronic communication. So let's start our conversation by drawing the global context. And Joanna, you have an extensive and horizontal experience in the international area of cyberspace. Is it really the case that we as Europe are slowly but gradually losing our technological competitive power? After AI, semiconductors, digital platforms and many other, are we now lagging behind in telecommunications?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the question, particularly in the context of the previous panel. I was listening very carefully, learning with joy, but yet somewhat surprised that Europe is so competitive on the global market. I love that argument. I would love to be able to support it, but I'm afraid that the question you posed is very relevant. We are indeed facing significant challenges when it comes to being competitive on the global market. We just had this very brief exchange where the Chinese technologies are indeed taking over. Europe has usually been criticized for over-regulating innovation. We face challenges regarding intellectual property protection, regarding data protection. We love the GDPR. We claim that the Brussels effect is the best thing invented since sliced bread, and it is. It protects personal data of individual end users worldwide. Whether they want it or not, whether they care or not, we will protect them, which is wonderful. But at the same time, if you're a startup, if you're a young company, Europe might not be the easiest legal environment to innovate in. That is the feedback we have been getting. It's not just a legal perspective, an academic legal perspective. So I would reluctantly say yes to the question that you just posed. The legal burden that weighs heavily on particularly new technologies is visible in Europe. The question is, how do we attend to that challenge? Or maybe, what is the price to pay? Now, the message that Europe continuously carries forward is that it's a feature, not a bug, as our IT colleagues would say. We want it to be that way, and we insist it's worth the while. We have put the individual in the middle of our regulations. And that's the design, that's the lessons we have learned, if you will, after 1950. And now, particularly facing global challenges, these lessons are resonating again and again. We have learned that indeed protecting the individual, even at the cost of innovation, even at the cost of actual revenue, as our US colleagues would argue to the contrary of, is worth it. So I would say that this is the European approach to regulation. It comes with a certain cost. How we counter it might be a question better attended by the previous panel. We've heard wonderful news about European capital being invested in Europe, about money literally waiting on the table to be taken by venture capitalists, to be taken by innovative startups here in Europe. So that was very good news. And I come just to confirm the challenges where that good news helps us to counter them. I'm going to give the floor to colleagues. I'm very eager to hear what they have to say. So that would be my initial short response to your question, but a brilliant question to start us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for presenting us with this landscape. So, Lisa, following this question about the price that we need to pay for having our exponential market, Europe is the home of the world's biggest telecommunication operators if you summarize their subsidiaries worldwide. The EU has created the most competitive but also customer-friendly market with relatively the lowest prices of services, so their penetration can be as big as possible. So, of course, the lack of a single market is unquestionable, but the question for me as a public administration is, do we really need it? What can it bring beside the possible increase in prices? And I have one quote for you from Commissioner Vestager Reflections on the Electronic Market in the EU, which says, if you ask me, when you have a beautiful tree, admire it, cherish it, hug it once in a while, and you will see that it will keep growing.
Well, thank you for that question. If we look at the market, the telecom market, recently the Commission by Executive Vice President Vestager and her colleague Commissioner Breton came out with a white paper on the future of telecoms. That white paper took a look at our businesses. At the same time, there is a report on the European single market by Enrico Letta that made kind of the same analysis as we saw in the white paper for how the business is doing. And I think that's the underlying premises here. So if we look at it, what were their analysis? One, they say that European competitiveness is, of course, a key strategic aim for the future, and it's an economic challenge. Two, well, infrastructure, digital infrastructure, that is key for European competitiveness. And the infrastructure both of today and tomorrow is going to put us forward. And those networks are 5G, it's 6G, it's fiber, it's quantum internet. They also said, well, there are things that are good in Europe. We have good parts. We have a relatively good level of connectivity, which is good. So I'm happy for that. But we also have things that work very bad in Europe. So, of course, if we look at our global peers, we are behind rollout of 5G and 5G standalone. So we are losing a bit, and that's back to Joanna's point, on the innovative parts of our industry. And I think that's extremely important for our connectivity value chain. We need to innovate here. Also, edge cloud is important. And if we look at our peers like South Korea, Japan, the US, they are investing much more per capita than we do. And my last point is, the Commission and Letta said, we need to do something about this. We cannot just sit on this information and wait for things to happen. And if we look at our sector, it's extremely regulated. So to do something about it, you need to do things on policy, on regulation, but also on competition. And I tend to agree, both as, of course, a telecom professional, but also as a citizen, because we think innovation is important and connectivity is important, but it's also important that we have that connectivity sovereignty in Europe, and we have secure connectivity in Europe, because we have a threat from, for example, Russia. So if we all agree that connectivity is important for connectivity, for competitiveness in Europe, we need to take connectivity very, very seriously.
Thank you, Lisa, for nuancing this issue. Following what you have said, I have a question for Mark. Mark, a bit more than a month ago, I had an opportunity of informal conversation with two representatives of European 5G vendors, no one will guess which ones, that agreed in principle that the challenge lays on the demand side. Namely, there is no killer app that can and will drive the demand, even for 5G standalone networks. So the question is the Commission looking for a holy grail that does not exist, like the market consolidation or like putting more incentives into the market, while the challenge lies on the demand itself that cannot drive the further innovative power.
Thanks, Thomas, and good question. I would still nuance a bit because I think that there is indeed true potential, but you also refer to it that for that we need standalone 5G because these will unlock this potential. And if we look at standalone 5G, and for the people that are not aware of the difference between standalone and not standalone 5G, so standalone 5G is real 5G that will benefit all the features of 5G, taking into account low latency and also enabling network slicing, which means that you have a core that is 5G and access that is 5G, while not standalone 5G, you are actually building 5G access on top of a 4G core. And if we look at the figures of standalone 5G, actually mid-2023, out of 114 5G networks, only 10 were standalone, which obviously means that we are today not able to unlock the full potential of 5G networks. One thing, and I think Lisa referred to that, is also obviously the difficulties of operators to invest because the lack of scale. If you look at the average number of subscribers for operators in Europe, it's around 4.4 million. In the US, it's 100 million. In China, it's 400 million. So you see that the scale here is very different, and also the ARPU, the average revenue per user, is far lower in Europe, which in fact brings the telecom capex, so what operators spend per capita, half as big as what is being spent in other big regions in the world. So if we come back to the demand side of things, so what can be unlocked by 5G standalone, it's really the industrial internet that will require that low latency, which is critical. Everything that relates to digital twins is enabling a lot of data to flow, but actually today 80% of that data is not used. So when we think about digital twins, so a digital representation of a factory, for instance, which can enable not only the monitoring but also the direct control of operations, making those operations far more efficient in terms of productivity, but also in terms of sustainability, there is a lot to win. Just as an example, we implemented these technologies, for instance, in our factories in Finland, where the use of digital twin can increase productivity by 30%, and also we were able to reduce energy consumption by 54%. So there is really a win there, and many sectors can benefit. If you take, for instance, the energy sector, in which digitalization is increasingly key to integrate the renewables into the grid. So solar energy, but also wind energy, but also taking into account, for instance, batteries from cars when the cars are not used. So all this needs digital technology to enable and to ensure that you have the balance between consumption and generation of energy. And then let's also not forget the defense sector. I mean, we are here at the Cybersecurity conference. Defense will need 5G. There are many areas which are not yet covered by 5G because, from a commercial perspective, it's not commercially attractive for an operator to deploy 5G in areas in which you do not have population, but areas which might be very sensitive from a defense perspective, for instance, along long borders. So for that, and also to ensure, information superiority, situational awareness of, the defense sector, it's critical to use 5G and trusted technology. So for all these reasons, I think we should continue to accelerate the deployment of 5G standalone. There are incentivizing policy measures that can do that, scale and, operator consolidation where that makes sense, that Lisa referred to, but also, spectrum and funding where that makes sense. And I would just like to add one final word on funding, because that relates to the EU taxonomy. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the EU taxonomy is providing a classification system for environmentally sustainable economic activities, so that you can have green investments that are being channeled towards those activities. And clearly telecommunication should be such an activity, because telecommunication can enable the green transition, but today connectivity is not part of the taxonomy, and so that's something that needs to change, and it would also help in funding telecommunication networks where that makes sense, and obviously standalone and the demand side which goes with it.
Thank you, Mark, for adding that perspective. You mentioned different defense needs for the network, so I have a question to Ingrida. So the Commission in the white paper put forward a couple of propositions concerning strengthening resilience and security of the network, like joint governance system on submarine cables or certification scheme. How does ENISA view these propositions? Are they well crafted to current challenges?
Good morning. Thank you. Very interesting exhibition today. First time in Krakow. Thank you for invitation. I'm coming from Cybersecurity Agency of European Union. We are based in Greece, but we are very happy to be invited and to be participating and share our knowledge and expertise at the national and international conferences. You were talking about 5G. What about 6G? So the technology keeps developing, yeah? And a white paper you referred to is a part of broader connectivity package. It has a general view of challenges and opinions for the future, a technical paper with recommendations to address gaps in the network, and recommendations to member states to improve resilience of subsea cables. The white paper mostly speaks about general challenges, about improving EU's telecom sector in the future. And in particular, we are in principle positive about these propositions. However, have your say. It is now publicly available for consultation and comments. And I encourage everyone to express your opinions and views also, not just at this panel, but also broadly speaking, because this is how the EU legislative process works. It builds on the public consultation opinions expressed, they are summarized and they are put forward for the actual legislation. And this is also an opportunity to express your views and share experience you are facing also on the hands-on developments and seeing the network challenges. The technical paper I was referring to, accompanying the white paper, contains also the results of risk assessments and a set of recommendations. Those risks we were doing together with the Commission services and member states. It was done together, and it builds on gaps in the protection of EU's communication networks and infrastructures. We work together with the member states in the forum called NIS Cooperation Group. So all member states are participating in that cooperation group. And we did risk assessments, finding gaps and recommendations to fix them. And these recommendations include steps to improve resilience of the EU submarine cables as well. I think that's in a nutshell that we have built on the 5G threat landscape quite heavily, but I think we should continue, and by doing it together and expressing your views, it is the future for us then. Thank you.
Ingrida, you mentioned that the technology is still developing, and one of the areas is space and satellite communication. So the issue that the white paper didn't bring is the extensive development of those systems and further coming interoperability of the system, terrestrial systems with non-terrestrial satellite systems. So shouldn't we perceive modern networks more broadly and focus also on this space direction. This is the part that the white paper is missing. Like, how can we provide security for our space infrastructure, especially in the light of constant navigation system jamming in the Baltic region or East Mediterranean region, or rumors about installing anti-satellite weapons on the orbits close to NATO and NATO member states?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Satellite communications falls under the EU telecommunications framework, and so the legal framework is there. And so are the national authorities that are overseeing these communication networks. And there's a new directive, NIS2, which comes into force this autumn, that every member state is now developing and transposing into national law. And telecom sector is now fully integrated into this directive as well. And with the arrival of low orbit SATCOM networks such as Starlink, the situation of course becomes booming market segment. It's not a niche market which is used to be anymore. And as such, we had also experience from the geopolitical context and situation in nearby with Kyivstar, where the spillover effect was also on the Europe via Viasat. But the situation was not critical. It was not a major incident. Yes, there was some disruption, but it was not major incident. But if the SATCOM market continues to grow in Europe, we have to be real that actually the impact will be much larger. I think overall, it's needless to say that all critical sectors in EU are now very dependent on the ICT systems and telcos, and which means also that we have to be aware of our dependencies of the supply chain. What I have here, I came with a postcard from Athens, from ENISA. What we do, we have Threat Landscape 2030. We have developed a very thorough methodological process on how to arrive to the top threats which are we facing, and we are continuously monitoring the situation. The top one threat currently is supply chain compromise of software dependencies. In this room here, we have a lot of new startups, new technological developments are happening as we speak. However, the cybersecurity shouldn't be afterthought. It should be built in, it should be by design and by default. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ingrida, for this overview of security challenges. Let's move back to the operators. Lisa, when we are observing a growing or expected trends on the market, we can see infrastructure sharing, network virtualization, and cloudification. Gradually, mobile operators are moving closer towards a different model of business activity with the same regulative playing field. While the core is still to provide an access to the network, there are some areas that resemble, for example, activity of over-the-top communicators, which on the other hand can monetize users' data. So we see that the challenge lays in the transfer of the capital to the different players of the network if we take into account these three layers: division to the content providers, network layer, and physical infrastructure layer. So my question is whether we need a new deal for this electronic communication sector as a whole to gather all these players, basically as a Commission proposed, to set a new level of relations or balance those relations.
Well, it's a very complex question, but thank you for it. Let me tell you the story in my view and also give a few policy options. Because as telecom operators, we believe that we urgently need a review of the regulation. And we need it now. We don't need it later. And why is this? As we speak right now, because we live in a global world, we see that President Biden has put ahead $1 billion for connectivity, but also to put it into Open RAN, Open Radio Access Network. And in South Korea, we see that they allow for telecom operators to claim compensation for whatever their networks are used for, also from some big tech of the public internet. Mark said China, they're pushing 5G very deep into their national fabric. So we see things are happening all over the world, and I don't think we would like to look back in 10 years' time when it's way too late and say, oh, we should have done something in Europe. So I see there are two main avenues we can go down, and we should use them both. Of course, one is to make the telecom sector attractive for private investments. We had some investors before, it's the same for cybersecurity, but here it's a much more regulated business, and that of course affects the investment. We also need to look at the different programs or based public funding on the networks. And if I look how we can improve private investment and make the telecom sector more attractive to private investments, we need to, also, of course, to address the underlying issues that are impacting our long-term health. This is also, of course, endorsed both by the Commission's white paper, but also the letter report. And one of the key measures to attract private investments are, of course, to transform the current regulatory but also policy framework. And one of them, and that has been talked about for a long time, and I know some get tired when I say it, but it's all about scale. Increase the scale of our companies. So mergers, industry cooperation, harmonizations of these rules within EU is paramount, and it needs to happen now. Deregulation, of course, no one likes to be regulated, but if we look at it, our regulation comes from 20 years ago when the landscape was much different, and it was needed back 20 years ago, but now maybe we should look at it and phase out some of the sector-specific rules. That includes, of course, price regulation that are, of course, also impacting our ability to invest. If we look at, there is a quote from Letta, and I'll read it aloud. We also need to, keeping the focus only on the pro-entrant regulation would be detrimental for a technology switch towards advanced networks that require massive investments. And this is also affecting cybersecurity vendors. So everything is connected. We need to see it in one big bucket. Coming to fair share, you hinted a bit on fair share. The way the internet ecosystem is working today, that's not balanced. So on one side, we see the operators investing a lot of money in infrastructure, and we see the large traffic generators are the ones extracting that money out of our infrastructure. There's also asymmetries in regulation. So we have a regulation on one side on the telecom, which the non-traditional players don't have. And that has accelerated that situation too. Back to public funding. Of course, that is also an avenue we should look at because that is helpful. But I think we need to target public funding where there is no business case. So you don't want to do public funding that will crowd out private investment. So that's a balance of looking at where do we have areas that could benefit from public funding. And one last thing is, on the public funding, we need it to be much more effective and efficient, because what we see is billions of EU fundings are pushed out to the member states, but we also hear about member states that need to pay back some of those money because they haven't used it. So we need to look at a system where the money is put into better use in a faster and more easy way.
Thank you, Lisa. Just to add that it is in fact a problem in a fiber environment to use the money that are directed to, cover the white spots. Uh, Thank you. And having this in mind, Mark, I would like to ask you, so again, having in mind these transformative changes and the current state of play, what can we do to put Europe where it belongs? So in my opinion, into the position of world's telecommunication leader, especially in 6G and the upcoming next generation networks.
It's a good question, and it's also a broader topic, as we have heard it several times that Europe is falling behind, also in terms of innovation, spending less than other geographies in percentage of GDP. And I also saw recently a study that out of 17 ICT, AI, and quantum technologies, that actually China is leading 13 of them. But obviously Europe has also strong pockets of leadership in innovation, and telecom, for instance, is one of those areas, with two European players, Nokia and Ericsson, leading on R&D for telecom. Nokia is, by the way, the only European vendor that has the full portfolio of mobile, fixed, cloud, and submarine networking technology. So what can we do to keep and to expand that leadership in telecom? What can we do from a policy perspective? And I think it's a little bit also what Lise mentioned related to funding and the effectiveness of funding, because obviously there is also funding for R&D. But many of the programs are very fragmented and also from a process perspective quite slow. If you look at the Smart Networks and Service Joint Undertaking for 6G, this is one of the programs we have important projects of a common European interest. So we have many of those programs, but sometimes the alignment is not done, so that there are overlaps, and the money sometimes is also not super efficiently spent. So that is something that is also addressed in the white paper, and that should be improved. Also in terms of speed, the allocation of funding, sometimes it takes more than a year, 2 years, from a call to get funding to actually getting the funding, which is obviously not good for the competitiveness of developing technologies in that way. And then there is one critical point, especially for telecoms. This is standards essential patents, and the way that we can use patents to fund and to remunerate innovators in R&D. And if you look at the situation today, there is a proposal by the Commission which is being put on the table in terms of reviewing the standard essential patents framework, which would be very detrimental for innovation in 5G and 6G by players like Nokia and Ericsson. So this is something that really needs to be looked at in detail. The proposal which is on the table would create a lot of uncertainty, a lot of bureaucracy, and could also move standardization outside of Europe. And obviously we are not against changing and improving things, but what is on the table today would really be very detrimental. Another thing that's critical, I think, to push leadership in telecom, leadership is having sufficient skills in terms of chip design. Chips and advanced chips are at the heart of advanced telecommunication equipment, and so we need to make sure that our institutions, academic programs, and curricula can push and make sure that we remain on top of chip design, and then also obviously have these skills kept in Europe. Last point I'd like to mention is related to trusted and cyber-secure networks. Also something that Europe needs to continue to lead in. We heard about 5G, 6G being the nerve of the whole systems, because all sectors are digitalizing, and that is underpinned obviously by networks. Security cannot be an afterthought, needs to be baked in. Multi-layered protection is vital also in terms of data encryption. And there, obviously, you know, we have the evolution to quantum and quantum computers, which could, of course, change the way encryption is being done, in the sense that we need to, you know, move towards quantum-safe digital infrastructures. And I think that's also something that Europe should continue to push hard. It will be very important going forward, so that we have our infrastructures and everything that relates to R&D very, you know, secured in that sense. So that would be some recommendations to keep Europe at the top for 5G and 6G telecommunication leadership.
Thank you, Mark, for this message. We moved a bit into the future, so let's stay there. And I have a question for you, Anna. So since you are at Cybersec, let's talk about cybersecurity. So concerning the integration of terrestrial and non-terrestrial segments of the network that I already mentioned and the interoperability that is coming, what will be crucial for building those networks, those interoperable networks on many layers, terrestrial, Earth, stratospheric stations, and satellite communication, with the security by design approach? How we should handle and design the process? And like my feeling is that we should look at the standard setting bodies, and Mark already mentioned that this is the area where we need to particularly focus.
Thank you. And indeed, I would fully agree. There are a few points. This has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much. I'm going to start with brief feedback and then come back to your question on standards. So the 5G lesson, I think, is the one we should take away from the past and carry into the future. I would venture to say that our friends from China largely won the 5G race when it comes to standardization. And this discussion did not happen in Brussels. It didn't even happen in New York at UN, as some might think. It happened in the ITU, which is a UN agency, okay? But it largely happened at the IETF, which is an acronym that might need expanding for the newcomers in the room, which is the Internet Engineering Task Force. These are techies sitting at standards. They discussed those 5G standards years ago. They had strong input from China, and when input comes from China, it doesn't come from the civil society, it comes from the government. Now, if you look at the ITU now, and I encourage you to also participate in those voluntary open IETF meetings, the last one happening in Prague, just across the border from Krakow, you will see these discussions now happening on low Earth orbit satellites connectivity. If you look at the numbers, there is a very recent, very accurate report from ENISA from February 2024 on LEO's, low Earth orbit satellite cybersecurity. The numbers are astonishing. It's China, it's US, and it's Russia keeping up pace with those industry leaders, technological leaders. Europe is nowhere to be mentioned, but I will give the floor to my colleagues to speak about OneWeb, which is probably the only Europe-based, but not an EU contender in that race. We are lagging behind, and the time to act is now. If we are to face the facts from the standardization point of view, we've lost the 5G race. Our friends, colleagues, partners were quicker. The time to act now at the standardization level are LEOs, low Earth orbit satellites. I don't want to say SpaceX and Starlink, I want to say Iris Square. Europe has a plan. One of the previous speakers mentioned autonomy. We like to speak about cyber sovereignty. Well, not in Europe so much, that's a Chinese term. In Europe, we speak about technological autonomy. We want to be autonomous in cyberspace, and that autonomy starts at the infrastructure level. We've lost that debate with 5G, struggling who to buy equipment from. We might have a chance for low Earth orbit satellites if we act quickly and efficiently. Now, the Iris Square enjoys interest from key players on the European side, but the feedback I'm getting is that that interest is decreasing. I'll welcome input from the audience. Maybe we have colleagues from different countries. Poland clearly is not a leader in that debate. So if we are to zoom in on an area at this point of standardization and try to shape it with regulation, low Earth orbit satellites are the place to be, so to speak. And that place to be, I love Brussels despite the 28 days of sunshine, so you guys get there. but it's the ITU. That's where it's happening. It could be the IETF if we have the skill sets to input it with information, and I will come back to what you said there with sustainable development, with regards to how we shape these technologies to benefit everyone. This is not on Chinese agenda, obviously. This is not on US agenda, more focused on the revenue coming from the industry. We have seen this with SpaceX over both. First, Ukraine, where Elon Musk rode in on that white satellite and provided connectivity. We've seen these attempts over Iran that was completely cut off, and that help that was offered was not welcomed. And we're seeing this now over Gaza. So you can see these events happening. Europe is not really participating in those discussions. In that ANISA report, there is a Space Act draft mentioned. Now, this might be a way for us to duplicate the Brussels effect success, if that's how we wish to view it, universally. So if we wanted to ensure that those new infrastructures at the level of standardization and then regulation and then eventually the data that flows through those infrastructures reflects European fundamental values. I'm not saying human rights, just not to disengage those focused on cybersecurity, but there are fundamental values of trust and data protection we have in Europe. It doesn't have to be personal data, it could be any kind of data. If we want to make sure we're successful in shaping those future discussions, the time to act is now. Now, at the Lodz Cyber Hub, Lodz is a city in Poland. For those of you who have not had the opportunity to join us there yet, we are now in phase 2 of a project that's dedicated to regulating LEOs, low Earth orbit satellites. We've looked at international law, we've looked at regional regulations. We're hosting a summer school for this specific theme in 2 weeks' time. Why? Because there is such a steep learning curve, right? We only have 16 minutes, and I could easily take up those I want, no worries. But there's such a steep learning curve when you try to get to the bottom of data in a satellite that it's very difficult to carry that discussion for an average cyber ambassador whose portfolio is very broad, for an average public servant who might be new to the cybersecurity area. You kind of delegate that trust to the ITU folks who've been doing that for a while and are keeping those complicated technical discussions. It is a technical issue, but it has tremendous cybersecurity and data protection, data in the broader sense, implications. So I love the look at layers, we like to call them internet layers, that you've offered here. I'll probably conclude with a piece of trivia. In cyberspace, code is law, and that code is being developed now. So I'm going to stop here. We have a few more minutes for questions, but thank you. Thank you for the question, and thank you for moderating this discussion in such a skillful manner. Thank you.
Thank you for this answer. And since I'm participating in the ITU works, in different groups of ITU, I can only agree with you that Chinese delegations in terms of telecommunication standards and radio spectrum are overwhelming those European ones. Of course, there are delegations like French one, which is always very active in the satellite area, but yes, we are outnumbered very, very much. Anyone is willing to comment on that issue?
Yeah, perhaps just on standards, what is absolutely critical is that we keep global standards. If we would have different standards in different regions of the world, it would be a tremendous cost, which, we can put obviously our money somewhere else. So, but on the other hand, I agree with you. I mean, as Europe, we should continue to, lead very important standardization discussions, not forgetting the importance of global standards.
If I may add, just to complement what you were saying, all these thoughts and expertise you are having also in the knowledge you develop, this have to be transformed into the public institutions as well. As ANISA, we are making the hub that where the public and private can meet and actually bring this knowledge together. NIS2 directive I mentioned, this is something that is coming in, and member states are super busy now developing national law to transform this. Space is also there. It's a new sector now. Yes, telcos are explicitly mentioned there as well. So all minimum cybersecurity measures are a must. It's not an afterthought. it should be somehow embedded already, right? But it's with the national authorities to make sure that and how it is phrased and how it is built in. Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the moderation. Thank you.
Lisa?
I just have two comments to what Joanna said, and I agree on your kind of analysis of how things are going and the urgency. You actually put the finger very much on that we see that standards are not only technical, they are also political, and they truly have a huge influence on our lives. And we need to realize that, so that's one thing. The other thing is, connectivity is a broad technology. It's not only fiber and 6G and 5G, it's also satellites. And I completely agree, as Europe, we need to look at this as an industrial policy and see where can we take this and how can we make sure we're not falling behind on all kinds of connectivity.
Thank you. I think it's another panel where the speakers agree that we need to cooperate academic, private and public sector. So that is the main takeaway from the conference, maybe. But we have still 12 minutes, and I have an additional question for you. Scrolling in the white paper, there's an issue that Mark brings, quantum networks and migration to post-quantum cryptography. Is it the new area of the next decade, not even next decade, but maybe 2040, 2050? Is it the direction that the future networks, in your view, will be heading? Anyone willing to take the question?
I will try to speak on behalf of the group to say yes, I think, right? I think it's a very simple question that you're asking. Are next generation networks a thing? Yes. But it probably comes down to how we fund it, how we regulate it, and how we ensure that they remain open and universal. I like Mark's point. The other side of this debate, if we don't lead, if we give up, if we let others lead, is fragmentation. If you look at the DNS, we have the DNS for EU. So even Europe is thinking about building walls in cyberspace and keeping us safe, which is detrimental to the entire idea of one world, one internet, of a universal cyberspace. Now, my sociology colleagues are saying you can't prevent the way that evolution will unfold. It's just a society that will work as it does. We can't stop it. But if we want to tweak the way that future happens, we want to make sure that those next generation networks remain open, inclusive, sustainable, and fair.
On quantum communication, of course, that's going to be a very important next step. If we're not upfront here, others will define the world around us. I see Europe has a strong university research around quantum computing, so we are there. The next step is how to industrialize it, how to roll it out, how to make it happen. And there, of course, it will also be up to us as operators, but also the vendors. Mark, I'm looking at you here. So we need to make sure this is happening in a way where, again, we're not stifled by regulation.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, if we need or think of technological revolution to succeed, we should ensure that our networks, telecommunications, are able to transmission speed is there. We have to have storage capacity. We have computing power, of course, and interoperability, right?
Yeah, but perhaps just a point that we need to ensure consistency and in terms of adoption across EU member states on quantum safe standards, because obviously if you have one member state working already with quantum safe standards and not the other, it will be a problem for the data circulation around those. So that needs to be harmonized and comes in the single market discussion, obviously.
Thank you. So we have still 8 more minutes, and I I don't have any future-oriented question, but I would like to go back to the current state of play and ask you about the radio spectrum management, because it is a huge part of the white paper and the letter report also. So maybe, Lisa, it's a question for you, I think. Is it possible to create or enhance the single market without simultaneously, like at the same time, harmonizing the spectrum management, but on the management level, not the spectrum bands?
I think spectrum is, of course, key for us as operators. If you look at 5G, 6G, everything is based on spectrum. And the white paper is recognizing the importance of spectrum and also the harmonization. One EU harmonized way of doing spectrum, no, I don't think we can get there, but I think we can get further than we are today. If we look at it, the operators have invested 26 billion euros in 5G spectrum before the rollout. So this is an upfront cost before you even go into the equipment. And there are 2.7 more to come. But if we can do a harmonization on the license duration, the way you do the request for spectrum, there are lots of things we can work with, and also the spectrum availability is important. So I don't see Europe have a Europe-based spectrum all harmonized, but if we can do all the other parts around it and also bring down the cost, because if you need to pay billions up front before you even start roll out your infrastructure, you're actually behind. So it's again, look at spectrum and look at the connectivity as an essential part of a digital world, and have it as it's something that can enable the competitiveness of other industries in Europe and not as a money machine.
Thank you, Mark.
Perhaps just complementing what Lisa said on spectrum and the importance of spectrum, because obviously, you know, without spectrum there is no deployment of mobile technologies. And if we look at 5G, one of the reasons that Europe is late with 5G is that in terms of availability of spectrum, that was also late and not harmonized. And you know, earlier the European Commission came out with a guideline to have all 5G spectrum allocated, so for all the member states by end 2020. And end 2020, there was just one country that actually had allocated 5G spectrum, and that was Finland. And by the end of 2023, there are still a number of countries that have not allocated 5G spectrum. So, you know, making sure that we are early and that we have a harmonized approach. I know it's not easy, and Lise mentioned obviously that, you know, getting to the ideal situation might not be possible, but at least that we can do it better than what we are doing today, and especially in preparation of 6G, because obviously we should make sure that we are not getting in the same situation that we are today in with 5G, with 6G, and that we have delays versus other parts of the world because being late in allocating 6G spectrum. So we should take action now to resolve the issues on spectrum. And I think, you know, the Letta report also mentioned that. We had it obviously in the white paper that, you know, there is a push towards doing it better. So that will be important for Europe to, you know, to take the lead in 6G as well.
Thank you. Just let me for a while be a public servant and stand in the defense of the spectrum allocations. So my comment is that the EU and the Commission and the private sector need to take into account that those harmonized deadlines or dates for assignments haven't taken into account external relations or legislative burdens that certain countries had. I'm not speaking about Poland right now. And the process needs to be designed well during the 6G, while identifying 6G pioneer bands. So we need to take, as Europe, as European Commission, as member states, we need to take into account also, especially right now, external relations. We are having big problems in Poland with this factor. And the current state of play with current allocations, and legislative obstacles that certain countries have. So this is a very big melting pot of different kinds of factors. But we have last 3 minutes, so I will ask one question for every one of you. What is the most, in your opinion, what is the most important take from the white paper, from the letter report, and from the current discussion about the future of the networks that is right now circulating and that we need to tackle with the most serious matter? So we can start from Joanna, maybe from Joanna to my right hand.
Difficult. One key message, I think it's cooperation. We've heard this here. It's cooperation. I'm going to sneak into cooperation and trust. I think these are the two key components. It comes with money, it comes with regulation, but I think if we can scale the experience we have, that means cooperation, and if we can find trusted partners worldwide, we can't do it alone. Maybe in developing countries and targeting that outreach where we can build networks, that is probably worthwhile. I'll stop here. Thank you again.
From my side, it is the recognition of an industry that needs more investments and that needs help to accumulate that investment, because it's not happening unless we look at the framework that is put upon operators in Europe. So regulation, policy, etc., that is defining, are you attractive to investments as an operator? And that this infrastructure and the lack of investment are key to all Europe's competitiveness.
From my side, hello, yeah, from my side, currently this paper is under public consultation. Don't let these good ideas dry out here, submit them, and then I think this is also part of success.
We have still 10 days
Yes,
to the end
correct.
of the public consultation.
30th of June.
Yes, we are encouraging everyone to put their comments.
Also, so from my side, a good assessment of the situation, the recognition that, you know, Europe has also strong vendors that, you know, need to be pushed to make sure that we get the right, you know, technologies at the right time. And then I think what is important is the sense of urgency here. I mean, the time is now, and we should make sure that, you know, after the consultation and the results, we get in action very quickly.
Thank you very much for this inspiring session. I can only compliment that without the network, there won't be a cybersecurity to tackle. So thank you once again, and please warm applause for our distinguished speakers.